Debbie MacCoy's condo complex has crumbling foundations. She's been pushing for testing for years and says this is a necessity.
Once we learn what the percent, the threshold is for how much is too much, then we can free up all those homes and they no longer have the stigma, having trace amounts of peritite. Good afternoon. I'm Debbie MacCoy, your Connecticut concrete queen and international advocate. Before I get started where we left off on the public acts, which you see over there, there's a couple house cleaning items I'd like to discuss. Number one, the camera doesn't add 10 pounds. It adds 20. Number two, there was a sound issue for channel 1070. Where, you could see me, but you had to turn the volume up to like 75 to be able to hear me. Well, Comcast has fixed that. And number three, last segment, I spoke of the CIFSIC creating the concrete advisory and disclosure for seller and buyers. That's this form right here. Well, it turns out it wasn't CIFSIC, the captive insurance, that created it. It was actually the Connecticut Realtors Association that created it, CTR for short. And it's important that I speak about this Connecticut advisory report because on the report, it has a foundation disclosure. And it also has a notice to the buyer. And that's really important because it doesn't spell out the CIFSIC clause that folks as buyers in the state of Connecticut need to know. What it does say is notice to buyers, seller disclosures contained herein are specific to providing knowledge and results of any testing, inspection, or repairs related to a foundation on the property. A visual inspection is just a statement of condition at the moment of the time of the inspection, not necessarily a prediction of the future of the foundations. Claim funds may be available through CIFSIC for residential dwellings purchased on or after February 1st, 2019, which meet certain eligibility and professional inspection requirements. For complete information, updates, and availability of funding, go to crumblingfoundations.org. So it doesn't specify that clause from CIFSIC that says that in order to avail the scheme, you have to have a foundation inspection from either a structural engineer or a certified home inspector. And these certified home inspectors have to go through special training, and it's hours long. And after the class, they take a test, and it's every year they have to re-up and be certified home inspectors. So a lot of people think if you waive the home inspection, you're in trouble. So people say, oh, I had a home inspection, but did you have a foundation inspection? Did the engineer or the certified home inspector give you a severity class coding? Severity class 3 is your worst. Severity class 2 is you still have time, but eventually it will be as bad as a class 3. Severity class 1 is where you may have had a core test and it showed just trace amounts, but the home is 17 years old, there's no signs of cracking, no distress, but it has trace amounts of peritite. Well, that affects the market because nobody wants a home with peritite, not if it eventually, oxidizes and internal sulfite attack occurs. So I just wanted to make clear that the Connecticut Realtors created the concrete advisory, but I think they could have gone a little further by making sure folks know if they buy a home and they didn't do a home inspection, specifically a foundation inspection, and got the severity class coding, they cannot avail the remediation scheme. Okay, so I've taken care of that. Now I want to talk to you about the last thing on my laundry list was, thank goodness Staples returned that small whiteboard. It just wasn't big enough for me to put information. Like, as you see over here, I've got the new whiteboard, which gives you more information, and I'd like to talk to you about that because I want to recap some of the public acts that we discussed and go into further detail on the ones that I wasn't able to discuss with you. So I'm going to go over to the whiteboard so that we can discuss each public act and the industries it's affected. This is a template, by the way, for homes affected in Ireland and for homes affected in Mass. In Ireland, they really have an inept grant scheme where it doesn't really meet the demands that are necessary for it to be a successful remediation scheme. I think I told the viewers that they have about 64 homes in the last 5 to 6 years completed, whereas we have about 1,080 homes completed now in the same time frame. And in the same time frame, Massachusetts has 0 homes remediated because they have yet to create a remediation scheme for the affected homeowners who have been asking for help since 2017. Okay. Here we're going to talk about the legislative acts for Crumbling Concrete Foundations, and on the other half, the industries affected. I started talking about each public act and how it builds on the last public act, and I will finalize that, but I want to recap some of the public acts that we discussed that you might not have been able to see on that teeny tiny whiteboard that I purchased. So, Public Act 2016, Public Act 16-45. Reassess, so what did that do for homeowners? It legislated that the towns where homes were affected, if a homeowner came in with a structural engineer report or a certified inspector report that stated the home was affected by peritite, they could bring that and fill out a form at the town and apply for a reassessment on the affected properties due to sudden and abrupt collapse on the market value of the home. And then also Public Act 16-45, it affects the construction industry, and it was created so that future homes, we would be able to trace back exactly where that concrete came from. So documentation provided prior to the certificate of occupancy, when the builders are building a home, before they get the CO, they have to provide documentation on who the installer and who the supplier is. What was the result of Public Act 1645? It was a tax break on the home because literally your home was worthless. It was the land that had only property value. Okay, in 2017, Public Act 17-2, that created and funded a remediation scheme by creating and establishing a captive insurance called CIFSIC Incorporated. CIFSIC is the mnemonic for Connecticut Foundation Solution Indemnity Company, and they assess claims and distribute funds. It also, Public Act 17-2, established for each town when the home is being repaired, it waives the permit fees on foundation repairs. I believe it's like $15 for every 1,000 that is spent, and with the housing cap at 190,000, that's, you know, close to 3,000. Another savings for the homeowner. Public Act PA 18-160. That's the Healthy Home Fund established and funded by a surcharge of $12 per homeowner policy. Not for renters, but for people that actually own the home. And it's for 10 years, and it's $1 a month. And also under the Healthy Homes, it helped with other abatements like lead, radon, and other contaminants. Then we have Public Act 18-179. That was the residential disclosure report. This is in 2018 as well. And that report, the residential disclosure report, is codified. Includes questions related to concrete foundations. This was very important because folks prior to that weren't really disclosing that they had a crumbling concrete foundation. Some folks went as far as painting over the cracks, finishing the basement, putting that foam board on to cover so that when the homeowner came in and they looked down in the basement and they saw a finished basement, they really had no idea what was behind it. So that, the residential disclosure report was very important. Okay, so now also in 2018, well, I'll go back to 2016, in that act, the DCP investigation, Department of Consumer Protection. And then in 2018, the insurance benefit program was created. And that was because the governor and attorney general, and I believe the superintendent of the captive insurance was involved in the meeting. And that was to get the three big insurers of homes to set up an insurance benefit program. And that was with Liberty, Travelers, and the Hartford. They offer the homeowner $25,000 for ancillary costs related to your home construction, the foundation repair. So anything that got disturbed or destroyed during the repairs that CFSIC doesn't cover, those ancillary costs from those three insurance companies can go up to $25,000, and or if you had any one of those three during the time of owning that home, $10,000. So that's a good thing. And okay, so then Public Act 19-192. What did that do? It broadened the definition of residential buildings by including condo structures over 4 units. In the original Public Act 17-2, the language was interpreted to be anything over 4 units were thought to be commercial. However, I think I explained last time, everyone that owns a condo pays a mortgage, pays their own taxes. They don't rent the condo, they actually own it. Although the condo association owns common areas, like the foundations, they were in charge of applying to CFSIC, but the homeowner, you know, is now the condo owner because of this act, Public Act 19-192. Because of that act, now condos could apply to CFSIC. And that the signing was in July of 2019. And I think I mentioned in the last segment or the one before that myself, Tim Heim, and Linda Tofilowski was there for the signing of that act. It was extremely important. And a couple other things were born out of 2019. And that was not only the broadening of the definition, but it also created a bank loan. So it established a collapsing foundation supplemental loan program with three of the biggest banks like Webster and Peoples, like that. So then when you get to Public Act 20-3, what that did was expanded the bank loan program to condo associations. So this association could go for a loan, because to repair the foundations, we get 78,000 is the cap per unit, but the cost is anywhere from 82,000 to 86,000. So the balance that CIFSIC doesn't cover, the condo association has to take out a loan and then special assess the condo owners. So Public Act 20-3 expanded the supplemental loan program to include condos, just like Public Act 19-192 expanded the remediation scheme to include condos. So Public Act 21-120, extremely important for a few reasons, because it gives us quarry standards. And by standards, I mean limiting peritite and having quarry producers submit GSRs, geological source reports, on the storage, processing, mining, and all that good stuff. And they have to have a geologist test the aggregate. And so Public Act 21-120 was very important for that. And also in 2021, Public Act 21-111, which explored the extent of peritite in non-residential commercial buildings and stuff like that. So the legislation put aside $175,000 for CIFSIC to do a study on, in the capital region, northeast region of Connecticut, where the towns that are affected, like maybe municipalities and stuff like that. So they did a study on it, and they found out it wasn't as bad as we had thought. So that's good. Public Act 21-120, which eliminated the sunset date for the captive insurance. That was important, because when the legislation was first created, it was only 5 years, and explored the extent of pyrite damage in non-residential buildings, increased funds by $100 million. So that was Public Act 21-111. So it gave us another $100 million for 2023, 2024, 2025, 2026. Not $100 million each year, but $25 million. And over the course of those 4 years, it's an additional $100 million. So 17-2 gave us $100 million bonded funds. Public Act 18-160, creating the Healthy Home Fund through the surcharge, that was additional funding. And then Public Act 21-111 gave another $100 million. Now we're on Public Act 23-185. Aggregate producers for aggregate and concrete that didn't come from quarries must submit GSRs. For example, if a construction company is blasting and, for development or something, they're blasting rock to build a development in there, that blasted rock, there was a loophole. That wasn't being tested, but yet that aggregate was being sold to go into concrete. So that PA Public Act in 2023, PA 23-185, aggregate producers for aggregate and concrete that didn't come from a quarry must submit geological source reports. The concrete aggregate producers must follow through on the GSRs, and then the concrete producers must confirm with the aggregate producers that they complied and did the tests and be able to show that to the new purchasers. So it closed that loophole, and it actually identified the loophole. Okay, now 2024, last year. Public Act 24-55, an act requiring notice of reevaluation to homes affected with defective concrete foundations. When Public Act 16-45 was first created, in the legislation it said for 5 years. So from 2016, 17, 18, 19, 20, then 2021 came, and people were like, wait, I still need to reassess my home. I just found out I have a crumbling foundation. So they've extended it, and before that, under reevaluations, we weren't contacted about a reevaluation because we had filled out the reassessment form for the condo. I'm saying my son, who owned the condo at Ryfield that was affected. We applied for the reassessments, but for years we didn't hear anything. And then this act, 24-55, requires that the town notify the affected homeowners that there's going to be a reevaluation. So they'll come back and they'll say, okay, let's see, you've had your home evaluated by a structural engineer or certified home inspector, and you haven't fixed it. Where are you in the claims line? Have you filed for a claim? Is your builder, not able to do the remediations this year? They just want to know that you do intend to fix the concrete foundation, because they have given you a reassessment in good faith too. Because back in 2016, the insurance commissioner contacted the insurance industry, the industry that sells homeowner policies. And she stated in October 2016 that you couldn't not renew or you couldn't not sell homeowner policies just because a home had crumbling foundation. Even though in the insurance contract, because they firmed up the language, before it was ambiguous. So homeowners were winning their lawsuits. But the mitigation of repairing the foundation falls on the homeowner. So they had the right to say, I'm not going to renew because you didn't mitigate the damages. But the insurance commissioner took that off the plate and said, look, next year we're looking into creating a remediation scheme. We need it legislated in. So the homeowner that is affected plans on doing the remediation, but they don't have the finances to do it. So the insurance company agreed and said, okay, we won't non-renew and we won't cancel the insurance. So that was a really good thing that happened. And also in 2019, I also want to point out that school construction reimbursement retrospectively was paid back to Tolland and Ellington due to parasite damages. So those are the public acts, the legislative acts that were created to help homeowners. This is an excellent template for Mass and Ireland to follow, because DCP did the investigation, and by investigation I mean they went out and tested the aggregate. In Ireland, their investigation, their remit to do an investigation was so long as you did no testing. Crazy, right? I know. So the industry's affected. So the insurance, first industry affected, obviously. The lawsuits and the Connecticut Supreme Court decision. There were a great many lawsuits. Trust me, I read them all. I briefed them all. And a lot of things came out of it, like discovery and deniability. That went on for a while, 2016, 2017, and finally at the end of 2018, the Connecticut Supreme Court agreed with the insurers based on the Washington case, which was small. I'll give you a small detail of it. They said in the Washington case that so long as the homeowner is still living in there, it's still habitable, there's no help. So the Supreme Court agreed with it and said that these homes have not abruptly or suddenly collapsed. They're still habitable and homeowners are still living in them. Although I told you last segment or the one before that, there was a home in Wellington that was demolished because it was unsafe. It was not habitable anymore. So then discovery and deniability, ambiguous, I've just mentioned, and the insurers tightened up the language all the way up to 2016. I think it was Liberty, Peerless, and one other, Merrimack. They tightened up the language in 2016. And to include in the clause where they exclude foundations being repaired unless it's a sudden and abrupt. However, if you have a foundation and it hasn't been repaired and there is a collapse, it's on you because you didn't mitigate the damages and you knew about it. So then the insurance program that I told you about over here, 3 insurers put in money to give homeowners $25,000 per home for up to $25,000 per home for ancillary costs. They don't just write out a check for $25,000. You have to have your receipts and you have to have a CIFSIC participation agreement and stuff like that. So that's important. And then E is the surcharge, which I also mentioned. It affected the insurance because they have to collect the $12 per year. Then they funnel it to the insurance department, and then the insurance department funnels it to the Department of Housing. Banks. No equity, no loan. The banks weren't offering loans because there was no equity in the home. Also, banks, no forbearance. Now, had FEMA come in and said, yes, this is a natural disaster, which it is, and I think they agreed to that, but it wasn't sudden or abrupt. If FEMA had given us that status, we would have automatically received forbearance for 3 months, 90 days. And pretty much for most of the contractors, 90 days is ample to do a foundation repair. So banks didn't give out loans. They didn't give out the forbearance that homeowners needed. They were a default state. So if a homeowner foreclosed on the home, walked away, gave the keys back to the bank can sell it and whatever deficiencies, whatever amount that's left that they haven't recouped, they can go after the homeowner for that. Then no disclosures. Loophole. The loophole for banks is that they didn't live in the home, therefore they had no knowledge. So when somebody forecloses on a home and a bank sells it, they don't have to disclose. They don't fill out disclosure form because they didn't live there. And then E, the bank program. Just like the insurance, E, the surcharge, and D, the insurance program. E is the bank program, which a homeowner can borrow up to $75,000, pay it within 15 years, and the state of Connecticut guaranteed $20 million to these three banks that offered to do the banking loan, the supplemental collapsing fund. So now we're in real estate. The saleability, the market dropped, and it did drop in this area for quite a few years. If you had trace amounts of peritite because you did a core test, because you're like, oh, I'm in the time frame, I'm in one of the affected towns, don't ignore it, core it, you took that advice, and you did a core test on your home, and it came back trace amounts. Well, CIFSIC will accept a core test, but if there is no damage to the home whatsoever, they're not going to replace a perfectly good, sound foundation just because there's trace amounts of peritite. Those trace amounts, and with the building codes changing after 2000, some of the homes might have it, very minute amount. And even though it'll never be affected, people just aren't going to buy it because it's got peritite. So that affected the real estate. And also, you get a severity class code 1 for trace amounts. And I call that the line to nowhere because CIFSIC won't repair it and the homeowner can't sell it, but CIFSIC created something fantastic, and I've mentioned it the last time, the transfer of claim. Even though you are class code 1 and you've signed up to CIFSIC and you sell the home, the seller must, within 30 days, transfer that claim. It's not on the buyer to do that who's bought the home. And if the buyer tries doing that, we've got a problem. Actually, 2 days ago, somebody contacted me and said, hi, Debbie, can you help me through the process? I just bought a home and the seller gave me the report. So now what are my steps? What do I do? And I said, uh-oh, did the seller transfer the claim? And they said, I have no idea. I don't know. All I got was the report. And so now I have a report in hand and I want to file a claim. And I said, but file a claim? The seller should have filed the claim, got in line, and then transferred that. So people have to watch out for that. Don't just get a report from a seller. You need that seller within 30 days of the sale to change this, transfer this claim over to the new buyer. So that's under real estate. And then we have, prior to legislations, houses with defective concrete foundation were patched up, finished, painted, and passed off. And then D, CIFSIC clause, you can't avail without the foundation inspection and a severity class code. So remember, foundation inspection is extremely important. F, transferring the claim and seller's place in line. Seller must comply within 30 days. And then the concrete industry, how did the legislation affect that? By limiting peritite. And they also closed that loophole for anyone that, and I'm going to read that right straight from the act because it's new, and it's new to me. All these up above, I know by heart. The last two, are new to me, newer to me. So I'm going to read Public Act 23-185 to you to explain more about that loophole that was closed. And then 5, the construction area industry must provide documentation on who the concrete supplier was and who the installer was. So that's the whiteboard. So as I explained before, I was going to talk to you about Public Act 23-185. And I'm just going to read a little blurb from this report. It's the Legislative Research, Crumbling Foundation Legislation by Alex Rieger, Principal Analyst, January 17th, 2024. And, you know, the LOR is, has created each of the legislative acts and just gives you a little blurb on it. So what I'm going to read is Public Act 23-185. It establishes material testing and related reporting requirements for entities that process coarse aggregate intended to be mixed with other component ingredients to create concrete for use in a residential or commercial concrete foundation, i.e. producers. It also requires concrete producers mixing concrete for residential or commercial foundations to confirm that the coarse aggregate they plan to mix into concrete, 1, complies with the Act and existing law requirements related to total sulfur and peritite concentrations, and 2, comes from a producer or quarry that has filed a current GSR with the state of Connecticut geologist. So that was just the little blurb I was reading, but the Public Act 23-185, it speaks about the producers of aggregate that process coarse aggregate intended to be mixed. And then it talks about producers of concrete must ask if the aggregate meets the standards set forth in PA 21-120. I didn't know this, but it was spoke about in Public Act 23-185. Not all crushed stone used in concrete necessarily comes from quarries. When there is blasting of rock for construction projects, the remains are crushed and used in concrete aggregates that otherwise wouldn't have to be tested for peritite. This will close that loophole. So I just wanted to give you a little more information on that. Okay. So, and then Public Act 24-55, an act requiring notice of reevaluation to certain owners of residential buildings with defective concrete. Be it enacted by the Senate and House of Representatives, an owner of a residential building who has obtained a written evaluation from a professional engineer licensed pursuant to Chapter 391, indicating that the foundation of such residential building was made with defective concrete, may provide a copy of such evaluation to the assessors. Any reassessments under this section shall apply until the next reevaluation becomes effective or the concrete foundation is repaired or replaced. So in Public Act 16-45, I told you about the reassessments. Well, in that Public Act 16-45, it was for 5 years. So this takes that sunset date off the table, and what it does is it applies, the reassessment will apply until you've fixed your foundation. And so members of the assessor staff or person designated adjust the assessment of the residential building. The assessor shall, in writing and not later than 90 days prior to commencement of a reevaluation, notify each owner of a residential building that was reassessed pursuant to this subsection that such residential building will be assessed during reevaluation. So there's no longer a sunset. It's not 5 years. Your home can be reassessed, and it stays reassessed at that value that they gave until you've repaired your foundation. But under reevaluations, they can now still come out and reevaluate your home. I mean, maybe you got a reevaluation of 50, but your home has gotten worse. And some people had 80% removed off their tax bill, and some people only got 30. So it depended on the damages of your home. So when they do the reeval, it might be beneficial to the homeowner, because they might say, you know, in the 5 years since you've had that reassessment, your home has gotten deteriorated worse. So that's important. Now I'm going to move on to FEMA. And, well, I don't know if we're going to have FEMA anymore. Under the Trump administration, they're talking about doing away with FEMA and just having states deal with sudden or abrupt natural occurrences. Or I mentioned the Boston Marathon because FEMA came and helped with that when there was the bombing with the Boston Marathon. I believe it was in April. And they came out and assessed and did the PDA and helped with the businesses that were affected by the bombing. Also, I mentioned Governor Brown when he contacted the president and asked for a presidential disaster declaration was because a dam broke. And the dam didn't build itself. Beavers didn't build it. I mean, the dam was man-made built. And it burst, the levee burst, and FEMA came out. It was a sudden and abrupt occurrence. They call the parasite situation here in Connecticut a slow-moving disaster. And I have an issue with that because, and I say this all the time, slow moving left the train a long time ago. Because these homes were built in 1983, a lot of homes in 83, 84, during the building boom time. And that was between 1983 and 1993. There was a lot. I have the Home Builders Remodeling Association. I have a graph that they have, and it shows how high the boom was, and then it levels out in the 2000s. So during the building boom, a lot of homes were built in 1983, 84, and a lot of the aggregate used for concrete went to J.J. Modis because they owned the quarry, the quarry that had the abundance of peritite, and that quarry, the concrete industry, Modis, sold a lot of concrete in that time frame. They had the market share. So these homes that were built 35 years ago are rapidly deteriorating. It's no longer slow moving. So the process of peritite is you have it in the aggregate, and it gets mixed with the admixtures and the cement and the water, and it's created concrete, and it's placed. Some people say poured, but it's placed. The foundation is placed, and the peritite starts to oxidize. And it oxidizes a lot faster depending on the host rock. Like in Canada, they had homes deteriorating within 3 to 5 years. In Ireland, it's more like 5 to 8 years. And in Connecticut, it's more like 10 to 30 years. So the Brimfield schist must be better than the phyllite in Ireland because it took longer, or maybe our building codes are better, or both. I don't know. But once the peritite oxidizes, a second mineral formation occurs, and I have a hard time saying the thaumasite and the integrite. Integrite causes strength loss, expansion, I apologize, and the thalamusite causes strength loss. Well, that second mineral formation, the internal sulfate attack that takes place during this process, and it takes place over time. And the first 5 years of the oxidation and this process, it starts to accelerate. And because the cracks are getting bigger, more water's coming in, more oxygen is getting in, because those are the two things you need to oxidize peritite is oxygen and water. And if those two things get in, then the mineral, iron sulfide mineral, goes through that process. And it takes a while, and it took Connecticut a while, but we didn't get the public awareness until 2015, 85, 95, 2000, 30 years later. So come 2015, it was because so many homes were showing such deterioration that they were, it wasn't just that contractor that I spoke of the last time, Mr. Childry, who informed the Department of Consumer Protection in 2008 that he had seen about upwards of 75 homes affected. This was by 2015, 7 years later, the homes were really showing it. And more homeowners were recognizing we got an issue here, because what it lifts the house up, and the footings, and I'm not into construction, so don't quote me on this, but it shifts the house. And everything above the foundation starts to become affected. You'll see cracks in the wall, you'll see in the corners of where the window frame is, doors won't close properly, closets don't close properly. So there's a lot of issues related to the structure after so many years. And so by 2015, the structures were becoming affected, and now it was a sudden issue, and it is abrupt, because not only is it affecting your structure, your foundation is deteriorating like you can't even imagine. So in order for FEMA to come out to help, had they acknowledged it was, in fact, a natural disaster, and the deterioration was rapid, and 35 years had succumbed, and had they done that, in order for the governor to ask for a presidential disaster declaration, there are 3 criteria that must be met for damaged or destroyed homes: the cause, the magnitude, and the economic impact. And I explained before, we were able to get the cause by the governor in 2016 ordering that investigation, and Department of Consumer Protection hired UConn, and UConn went to the suspected quarry and did a bunch of testing, literature review, they did everything. And it was determined by the final report, December of 2016, the cause. And then the magnitude, I explained, we were able to get that through the testing program that the governor set up through CROG, and also through the Department of Consumer Protection, when the governor asked homes that were affected for the homeowner to send in a consumer complaint. And so within a couple years, DCP had 806 complaints, whereas CROG had about 1,800 homeowners apply for the reimbursement through that testing program that the governor set up. The economic impact was twofold. The federal government came in through Congressman Courtney. He had the GAO, the Government Accounting Office, come in and do a study on the economic impact that it created on banks, on the real estate, on homeowners. And so we were able to go in a roundabout way to get the PDA, the preliminary damage assessment, taken care of by the state doing it. But like I said, for FEMA to come in, you need a presidential disaster declaration from the governor certifying what the cause was, what the magnitude was, and what the economic impact. What the cause of these damaged homes, please see report dated 8/31/18, the investigation done by the University of Connecticut into the cause. Cost the state of Connecticut $100,000. After 8 months of research and lab analysis, it was concluded that the sulfide mineral peritite was a contributing factor to foundations crumbling all across central and northeast Connecticut. The magnitude. What is the magnitude of these damaged homes? Please see recent DCP number of complaints filed to date, 720. This is when I made the document up when I was addressing the federal delegation and U.S. Secretary of HUD, Ben Carson. For a medium-sized state, it must be at least 582 damaged or destroyed homes. The Department of Consumer Protection has encouraged homeowners affected to file a complaint with DCP in order for the state to understand the scope of the crisis. The economic impact. What is the economic impact? That these damaged homes has affected the town tax base, the real estate market, the market value, and please see CROG's data on tax losses and costs of the towns affected in the millions of dollars in losses. So what will a FEMA afford a Connecticut homeowner that's affected? FEMA affords each homeowner in a federally designated FEMA area is very important and a necessary tool for helping homeowners with multifaceted crisis is threefold. Casualty loss. Out-of-pocket expenses not covered by insurance, the state, or FEMA may be a tax deduction on the year in which you made payments to repair the damage. Bank forbearance. In a federally designated FEMA area, banks must allow a 3-month forbearance on the mortgage loan. While the homeowner is relocated, they are not required to pay both the mortgage and a rental fee while living out of the home. 3 months will be tacked on at the end of the mortgage loan. And then the individual act. The individual homeowner with proof of ownership will receive financial help in the amount of, it was $34,000 when I created this. Please note, they will look at each individual claim, even when part of the claim was covered by insurance. Those funds will be considered when funding is made available. So I've got 2 minutes left remaining. So I just wanted to speak upon and finalize my talks for now on the public acts and the industries affected. And yes, they opposed, but eventually they were worn down because the legislators meant business. And that's why I said what Connecticut has done and what CIFSIC has done through their modifications and through their ability, through ESIS, looking at the claims, getting them, moved on for participation agreements. It's all been extremely well suited for the homeowners that are affected. Each piece of that legislation has built on the other and has addressed each year what is needed to wrap our arms around this long tail issue. And it would serve a purpose for Mass or Ireland to follow it. because, like I said, we have over 1,000 homes remediated, and every year we add 200 to 250 homes remediated each year. And that's because we have the healthy home funds of about 11 million a year and the 25,000 million each year. So we've got about 35 to 36 million per year to fix homes. And that, with the contractors, with having so many, it's brought the price down. And SIFSIC raised the cap, they've lowered their prices, and the average cost is within that time frame on the cap. Next time that I come, I'd like to speak to everybody. I'm going to have some guests, a contractor that does home repairs here in Connecticut and also does home repairs in Massachusetts, and patient zero for Massachusetts, Russell Dupree. We've spoke, and I'm looking to have them here. So the next time we speak, it's going to be with the Massachusetts homeowners that are affected, and they want to tell their story because they still don't have a remediation scheme. Thank you for joining me today, and I hope that what I've shared with you will be of some help. Thank you. Bye-bye.